The only time we ever charge a fee is if we actually end up making a successful recovery on behalf of the client or the client's loved one.
If you're badly burned because of someone else's negligence, do you know how to get help? Well, that's what we're going to find out today, because that's what we're going to ask the lawyer. Hi again, everybody. I'm Rob Rosenthal with AskTheLawyers.com, and my guest is North Carolina attorney Brian Davis. Brian, good to see you again. Thanks for helping us out.
Hey, Rob. Nice to see you. Thank you.
So let's just start with, what are some of the more common burn injuries you've seen at your practice?
Well, I've seen a host of burn injuries. We see everything from people being burned in house fires to being burned from electrical appliances, electrocution type things on the job settings, just really the whole gamut.
And I know that's a wide area, so and all those things probably have different approaches. But let's just talk in generalities. How does a burn injury, a burn victim, how does that differ from your ordinary personal injury cases?
Well, for starters, burn injuries are probably, in my opinion, some of the most painful injuries that a client can experience. They're just incredibly painful. And a lot of times the clients that we've represented have actually ended up in burn centers. We have several here in North Carolina. And they actually end up being placed into a medically induced coma for a period of time. They are so painful. So that's the biggest thing, in my opinion, that sets them apart from a lot of other serious injury cases.
What about the treatments? You're talking about being in a burn center. I got to imagine that's expensive and time consuming.
The treatments are horrible. It really puts shivers on my arms when I think about it, because a lot of these folks who are in the burn center end up having to have debriding, where they actually have to remove the skin that has died. And then they end up having to have skin grafts from other parts of their body, where they take skin maybe from a hip or a leg and they move it onto a chest or an arm or the face. It's very traumatic. And
that trauma, I would imagine, can be long lasting, even after you say, okay, they're healed, they're out of the hospital. I imagine some of the trauma from that can maybe lifelong.
Yeah, in most instances, it is lifelong. And the folks that I've worked with have had a lot of, emotional scars that obviously are really much deeper than the physical scars, though those are terrible too. And the clients I've worked with have all needed and sought, thankfully, psychological help. And that's, sort of the PTSD type trauma therapy is essential.
So I'd imagine when it comes time to figuring out what sort of damages, monetary damages, you need someone who has experience, an attorney has experience in that, so they know to look, because there are things that will be 10, 20, 30 years down the road that they may still be need support for, right?
That's exactly right. And we almost always have what's called a life care planner expert in these cases. And that's someone who has expertise in figuring out what those lifelong medical needs and costs are going to be.
You had mentioned some of the different types, and you mentioned like electrocution on the job. Sometimes is that just purely going to be a workers' comp? Is there maybe there's third party? How do you handle that? How's that different?
Well, every case stands on its own legs. You've got to look at all angles of the case. If it's an employer-only sort of situation, then it's a workers' comp case. But more often than not, in my experience, there's usually a third party that also has liability in these burn-type electrocution injury cases.
So that's why it's important to talk to someone like yourself to find out if there is what you call a third-party case, right?
Yeah, because a lot of times, workers' comp, the damages in a workers' comp case are limited, generally to medical expenses and lost wages. You don't get any pain and suffering type damages in a workers' comp case. So it's critically important to find out who else is responsible or who else may be responsible, and seek those pain and suffering type damages, those emotional injury damages, from the third party.
Obviously, in bird cases, like we said, it can sometimes be very, very serious. Sometimes it can result in death. How does that happen? Can survivors still seek damages on behalf of the person? How does that work, Brian?
Yeah, absolutely. If a loved one has perished in a fire or an electrocution type situation, then it really falls to the next of kin, the family members, to pursue those damages on behalf of the person who died as a result of the injuries. So yeah, we represent survivors a lot in these cases. We've got 3 right now that I can think of in our caseload where family members have come to us after a fire, and we got one electrocution case right now, and we're working with those family members to investigate and pursue those cases.
If someone is not even sure that they have a case, Brian, can they still come to you? And then is there a fee to find out if they even have a case?
It's funny you say that, because most people who come to us go, I don't even know if I have a case.
Right.
I don't know if this is a case. And then we investigate the case and figure out, who's really sort of behind what happened, which is not always apparent on the front end. And then we end up having what turns out to be a really great case. And so, but to answer your question, there's no fee to investigate a case. We don't charge consultation fees or upfront fees. The only time we ever charge a fee is if we actually end up making a successful recovery on behalf of the client or the client's loved one.
When we've talked to you about other types of injuries like trucking injuries, that sort of thing, you stress the importance of getting an attorney involved as early in the process as possible. I would assume that also applies here. Especially if it's a defective product or something like that.
Yeah, or an electrocution. Yeah, very, very important. And also in the burn situation, whatever it is, the forensic evidence is critically important. And by forensic, I mean whatever still exists, we need to preserve it. Because if you don't preserve it, you may lose the ability to prove why it happened and who's responsible. And those are the 2 things that you've definitely got to be able to do in these cases.
Really interesting information, Brian. As always, thank you for answering our questions today.
Glad to. Thanks for having me.
That's going to do it for this episode of Ask the Lawyer. My guest has been North Carolina attorney Brian Davis. Remember, if you want the best information and you want to be able to choose a lawyer that lawyers choose, be sure to go to AskTheLawyers.com. Thanks for watching, everybody. I'm Rob Rosenthal with Ask the Lawyers.